David, the state of mind as water isn't just a passive one. It actually is a state that can create a huge amount of focus and can actually have us be more effective. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, I think people are naturally creative. They're certainly naturally inventive and intentional. Once you clear the deck, you're not going to be able to help having creative ideas and having that stuff uncork. And when people begin to implement these techniques, what happens is there's a great sense of release and relief, and out of that clarity, there's a huge amount of creativity, huge amount of productivity that emerges almost naturally once that happens.
And how does that show up? How does this mind as water as a flow, how does that show up?
Well, let's take the flip side of it. Like, what prevents you from being in that state? And oftentimes what prevents you from being in that state is the fact that you're distracted. You're not present. You know, you've got some old business that's hanging around your head, and you're trying to focus on something and you're not there. Everybody at some point has been talking to somebody and knew that that person wasn't there, right? But for most people, what gets in the way of their ability to be clear and present is the distractions. And the distractions usually come from the fact that people have made commitments and agreements with themselves. All the woulds, could, shoulds, need tos, ought tos, all those things we call open loops, the incompletes out there. And that's everything from the little stuff like, oh yeah, I need to get back to Aunt Sally about that, about the birthday party she invited me to, all the way to get a life, all the way to get a new bank, all the way to get your, your doctor's appointment handled, all of that stuff. And most people don't realize how complex their life is and how many things they've actually committed to. So a lot of this methodology is getting people to become much more conscious about what those are and then be able to manage and negotiate them much more consciously. If you leave them in your head, your head's the worst place. And even the cognitive science now has validated the fact that your head is for having these ideas but not for holding them. Your head was not designed for remembering and reminding. It's designed to recognize patterns. It does that brilliantly. So I could look at a list of 15 people that I need to call, and I don't have any problem looking at that whole set of things and going, that's the one that's really going to be the important one for me to do. But if trying to remember 15 calls in your head, you will just be driven by latest and loudest and whichever one happens to pop in. And that's really what you want to get away from. You want to make your choices about what to do conscious, and knowing that all of the commitments you've made and all the open loops that you've got are parked appropriately. Not that you finish them, but that you know what they are. One of the ways we say that is you can only feel good about what you're not doing when you know what you're not doing. And most people don't have a clue.
So it shows up for them as a jumble. I'm thinking about a story I heard once about the way waitresses in busy restaurants handle things. And the wait staff was able to remember very complex orders and who ordered what and what their individual nuances were on the plates until they were complete, until they had finished with that particular table. And then it went away. It made space for the next table.
Exactly.
What I'm hearing you describe is it's like trying to remember the orders of every table in the restaurant simultaneously.
Exactly. And the problem is when you keep it in your head, it seems like that part of you has no sense of past or future. So it thinks you should be doing all of those all the time, at least psychologically. That's why you'll be, wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking of something you can't do anything about. Your brain actually doesn't have one. It's kind of stupid, at least that part of you. If it had any intelligence, it would only remind you of things when you could do something about them. I mean, everybody watching and listening to us right now probably has at least one flashlight around their house with dead batteries in it. Well, where are you typically reminded that you need batteries?
In the dark.
In the dark, in a blackout, right? Excuse me, that's not very smart. If that part of your brain had any innate intelligence, it wouldn't bother you about batteries at dead ones. Where would it bother you about batteries?
When I'm standing in the supermarket near the batteries.
When you pass the right, hey Jim, you need 2 AA's.
Yes.
Oh wow, they see if you could trust your brain could be your office, then you don't need a system. So the whole idea of systematizing essentially all of those commitments, all of those would, could, shoulds, all of those creative things we wrap ourselves around and get engaged in, that needs to be, as the scientists now call it, the external brain. So that your brain is freed up. It's not that you go stupid, on contrary. Right? What happens when you get freed up, you can then have access to your intuition, you have access to real intelligence, and you have access to a much greater perspective. You're really managing the forest instead of hugging the trees.